This dog raised 3 bobcat cubs, but when they grew up, the unthinkable happened. The lynxes have betrayed Luna. They've attacked Luna. Someone in the crowd shouted, wielding a stick as Hans rushed towards Luna, who lay motionless, bleeding from a wound in her shoulder, while Blitz, Stern, and Shatten stood growling nearby. Luna! Hans cried out in despair. But when the veterinarian Anna rushed over and examined the wound, she exclaimed in shock, "It's not a lynx scratch. Look, there's a knife mark." Anna pointed to a dagger stuck nearby, engraved with the word Falk, and firmly stated, "Blitz, Stern, and Shatten didn't attack Luna. They were protecting her." Hearing this, and after learning the truth from the security camera, Hans hugged Luna, tears streaming down his face. "You weren't wrong to have them, Luna. They love you." To discover the full story of this extraordinary motherly love and courage, subscribe, like, and listen. The first shard of dawnlight, gray and cold, had just begun to pierce the dense canopy of the forest near Munich when the scream tore through the morning quiet. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, a sound that ripped Elias Gruber from his sleep and had him stumbling towards the door of his small wooden cottage before his eyes were fully open. Luna. His own voice was a choked cry. He fumbled with the latch, his old hands clumsy with a sudden, icy dread. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a scene that stopped his heart. Luna, his beautiful 3-year-old German shepherd, lay sprawled on the dew-damp grass of the yard, a dark, viscous stain spreading across her sleek black and tan fur, matting it to her side. Her breathing was shallow, a ragged, painful sound in the stillness. And surrounding her, not touching, but positioned like sentinels, were the 3 of them. Blitz, Stern, and Shatten. No longer the tiny, helpless kittens Luna had found abandoned in a wooden crate at the forest's edge 6 months ago. Now they were magnificent, terrifying, nearly as tall as Luna. Their spotted coats rippled over lean, powerful muscles. Their ears, tufted and alert, swiveled, and their golden eyes, usually filled with a wild, playful curiosity, were narrowed, glinting with something cold and primal. Low growls rumbled in their chests, vibrations more felt than heard. Blitz, the boldest, took a half-step closer to Luna, his lips curling back to reveal long, sharp canines. Shatten, ever the shadow, flanked her other side, while Stern, always the most watchful, stood slightly back, a silent, menacing statue. Elias's breath hitched. This was it, the moment the villagers had whispered about, the moment he himself had secretly, guiltily feared. The wild had reclaimed them. They had turned on their foster mother. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Luna." He took a step forward, his legs feeling like lead. The growls intensified. Blitz lowered his head, a clear, unambiguous threat. Elias froze, a wave of nausea washing over him. His loyal Luna betrayed, and he helpless to intervene against 3 nearly full-grown bobcats. What had happened here? Why were they doing this? The air was thick with unspoken violence. The scene, a horrifying tableau of nature's brutal, inexplicable cruelty. Elias Gruber, a retired blacksmith of 68 years, lived a life as sturdy and weathered as the ancient oaks surrounding his cottage. Nestled deep in the Bavarian forests near Munich, his small homestead was a haven of solitude, a place where the loudest sounds were usually the bird song or the rhythmic clang of his hammer from his rarely used forge. His wife, Martha, had passed 5 years prior, and the silence she left had been profound, a constant ache in the quiet rhythm of his days. Luna had filled a part of that silence. Luna wasn't just a dog, she was a rescue, found abandoned and timid near a busy autobahn 2 years ago. Elias, with his patient hands and quiet understanding, had coaxed her out of her shell, transforming her into a confident, exceptionally gentle German shepherd. Her loyalty to him was absolute, her presence a warm comfort in the otherwise empty cottage. She was his shadow, his confidant, the soft nuzzle that greeted him each morning, and the warm body pressed against his legs by the fire each night. His world was one of routine. Early mornings, a walk with Luna through the dew-kissed forest trails, tending his small vegetable garden, chopping wood, reading by the oil lamp in the evenings. The nearby village, a cluster of houses a few kilometers away, provided his basic needs and occasional, brief social contact. He was respected, known as a man of few words but a good heart, if a little reclusive. The arrival of the Bobcat kittens had shattered that predictable routine. It was Luna who had found them 6 months earlier during one of their late spring walks. She'd come trotting back to the cottage, a tiny, mewling bundle of fur held gently in her mouth. Then she'd gone back and returned with a second and then a third. Elias had followed her to the edge of his property, where an old, discarded wooden crate lay hidden in the undergrowth. Inside, nothing. Luna had saved them from whatever fate had left them there. Elias, initially, had been horrified. Bobcats, wild animals, dangerous. Luna, what have you done? He'd exclaimed, his mind racing with problems. But Luna had been implacable. She'd curled around the 3 tiny spotted creatures, licking them clean, nudging them to suckle as if they were her own pups. Her maternal instincts, dormant until then, had roared to life. He'd named them Blitz for the speed one showed even then, Stern for the star-like pattern on another's forehead, and Shatten for the third's tendency to melt into the shadows. His initial plan to call the wildlife authorities had wavered as he watched Luna. She shared her food, kept them warm, and protected them with a fierce devotion that touched his old heart. He was a practical man, but he was also a man who understood loyalty and love. So he'd let it be, salving his conscience with the thought that they were too young to survive without her. He did notice, while cleaning one of the kittens in those early days, a tiny, broken piece of metal, like a fragment of a tag, embedded in the fur around Blitz's neck. It was stamped with a barely legible partial word. Elka! He'd puzzled over it for a moment, then tucked it away in a tin box with other odds and ends, the immediate needs of the kittens more pressing. The village had been abuzz. Elias's mad dog, raising wild cats. Some had chuckled. Others, more fearful, warned him, "They'll turn on her, Elias. It's their nature." He'd mostly ignored them, though a seed of unease had been planted. The kittens grew with astonishing speed. Their playful, kittenish antics slowly morphed into the silent, stalking grace of predators. Their mews became growls and hisses. They practiced pouncing on each other on rustling leaves, their amber eyes gleaming with an untamed light. Luna, however, remained their steadfast mother. She'd break up their rougher tumbles with a gentle nudge or a low woof, and they, in turn, would still rub against her, purring like oversized house cats, an incongruous sound from such wild creatures. Elias watched, a mixture of awe and trepidation in his heart. He knew this couldn't last. The forest was their true home, not his yard. But the bond between Luna and her adopted children was undeniable, a strange, beautiful, and perhaps dangerous interspecies miracle. The simmering tension was always there. The wild, untamable nature of the bobcats, held in check only by the love of a dog and the tolerance of an old man. The morning had started like any other. Elias had woken to the familiar weight of Luna's head on the edge of his bed, her tail thumping a soft rhythm against the wooden floor. He'd dressed, made his coffee, and stepped out to call Luna for her breakfast. But she wasn't on her usual spot on the porch. A prickle of unease, sharp and unwelcome, had traced its way down his spine. He'd called her name, louder this time, his voice echoing slightly in the crisp morning air. Silence. That's when he'd walked around the side of the cottage, towards the clearing where the bobcats often played. And that's when he'd screamed. Now, standing frozen at the edge of his yard, the image of Luna, bleeding and surrounded by the menacing forms of Blitz, stern and shatten, seared itself into his mind. His first overwhelming thought was betrayal. The villagers had been right. His beloved Luna, mauled by the very creatures she had nurtured. Get away from her, he finally roared, raw grief and fury lending his voice a strength he didn't feel. He grabbed a heavy branch he used as a walking stick, his knuckles white. The bobcats tensed, their growls deepening, but they didn't move from Luna's side. It was an impasse, terrifying and absolute. Just then, a shout came from the path leading to his cottage. "Elias, what's all the commotion?" It was Frau Müller, his nearest neighbor, a stout woman with a kind heart and an incurable curiosity. Behind her, two other villagers, alerted by his scream, were hurrying up the path. "They've attacked her," Elias choked out, gesturing wildly with the stick. "The bobcats? They've attacked Luna." The villagers stopped short, their faces paling at the scene. One of them, a young farmer named Carl, muttered, "We told you, Elias. Wild animals." The sight of more humans seemed to agitate the bobcats further. Blitz took another menacing step, his tail twitching. "I'm calling Dr. Klein," Frau Müller announced, already fumbling for her mobile phone. "And maybe the police." Elias barely registered her words. His focus was solely on Luna, on the shallow rise and fall of her chest. He had to get to her. Dr. Ava Klein, the village veterinarian, a woman in her late 50s with calm eyes and capable hands, arrived within 20 minutes, her old Land Rover bumping up the track. She took in the scene with a practiced, assessing gaze, her expression unreadable. "Everyone stay back," she said quietly but firmly, her voice carrying an authority that made even the agitated villagers pause. "Elias, can you tell me what happened?" I don't know," Elias stammered, his earlier rage giving way to a crushing despair. "I found her like this. They were all around her." Dr. Klein approached Luna slowly, cautiously, murmuring soothing words. The bobcats watched her every move, their growls a constant, low thrum, but they didn't try to stop her. It was as if they were permitting her approach, but no one else. She knelt beside Luna, her fingers gently probing the dog's side. Elias held his breath. After a long moment, Dr. Klein looked up, her brow furrowed in a way that wasn't just concern, but confusion. "Elias," she said slowly, "this isn't right." She pointed to the wound. "These aren't claw marks or bite marks from a bobcat. The edges are too clean, too straight." She rose and scanned the ground around Luna, her eyes sharp. Then she stooped and picked something up from the grass a few feet away, something that glinted dully in the morning light. She held it up. A knife, a short, wicked-looking hunting knife, its blade stained dark. "This is what injured Luna," Dr. Klein stated, her voice grim. Then she pointed to a faint, almost worn-off etching near the hilt. "And look at this. There's a marking here. Falk." Elias stared, his mind reeling. "A knife. Falke." The name echoed faintly, a distant memory. The tag fragment, Tilbechkak, it was the same. Suddenly, the scene shifted. The bobcats, still growling, still menacing, no longer looked like aggressors. Their posture, their unwavering proximity to Luna, was it a threat or a guard? "They didn't attack her," Elias whispered, a wave of dawning comprehension washing over him, so potent it made him sway. They were protecting her. His initial goal, to save Luna from the bobcats, dissolved, replaced by a maelstrom of new emotions: immense relief, profound guilt for doubting his grand kittens, and a terrifying, cold anger. Who would do this? Who would stab his gentle Luna? And why? His first tentative plan formed. He had a trail camera, one he'd set up near the woods to watch for deer. He had to check it. Now, the revelation that Luna had been stabbed, not mauled by her adopted bobcat family, sent a shock wave through the small group of onlookers. The villagers murmured, their earlier certainty replaced by bewildered confusion. Elias, however, felt a surge of adrenaline. The trail camera. He'd almost forgotten about it. A cheap device he'd mounted on a tree overlooking the main approach to his cottage and the edge of the yard, hoping to catch glimpses of passing wildlife. "The camera," he croaked, pushing past a stunned Frau Müller and hurrying into his cottage. Dr. Klein was already carefully preparing a makeshift stretcher for Luna, directing Carl and another villager on how to gently lift her. The Bobcats, though still tense, allowed this, their focus shifting between the humans and the surrounding forest, as if still expecting a threat. Elias fumbled the SD card out of the trail camera, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He inserted it into his old laptop, his heart pounding. The footage was grainy, time-stamped from the pre-dawn hours. For several minutes, nothing but shadows and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, a figure, tall, cloaked in dark clothing, moving with a stealth that spoke of ill intent. The figure approached Luna, who had risen from the porch, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Elias watched, his breath caught in his throat. As the figure lunged, Luna met the attack, barking furiously, but the figure was swift. Elias saw the glint of metal, saw Luna stagger. Then a blur of spotted fur. Blitz, then Shatton, then Stern, erupted from the darkness around the cottage, a silent, furious whirlwind. They were on the attacker in an instant, a terrifying combination of snarls, claws, and teeth. The figure cried out, flailing, dropping the knife. Luna, despite her injury, tried to get between the Bobcats and the man, as if to protect them, or perhaps still trying to defend her territory. It was in this chaotic melee that she must have been pushed or fallen close to where the knife landed, perhaps even being wounded again, or the existing wound aggravated. The attacker, overwhelmed, finally broke free and fled back into the trees, clutching an arm. The Bobcats gave chase for a short distance, then returned to circle the now fallen Luna. Elias stared at the screen, a cold fury hardening his features. Dr. Klein, having supervised Luna's careful transport into her Land Rover, came to stand beside him. She watched the playback, her expression grim. "Falk?" she said, her voice tight. "It's a name I've heard whispered. Rumors of an illegal wildlife trafficking ring. They deal in exotic animals, protected species. They're ruthless. The tag," Elias remembered aloud, "on Blitz, when he was a kitten. It said Falk. They must have been stolen or bred by these people, then abandoned when they were too small or too much trouble. And now they're grown. They're valuable," Dr. Klein surmised. This attacker wasn't trying to just scare Luna. He was likely trying to eliminate a guard dog to get to the Bobcats. Their first step was clear. Luna needed immediate, intensive care. Dr. Klein rushed her to her clinic in the village. The wound was deep, dangerously close to her lung. She'd lost a lot of blood. While Dr. Klein worked to save Luna, Elias reported the attack to the local Polizei. Officer Hannes Richter, a young, earnest policeman, listened patiently, took notes, and collected the knife and the SD card as evidence. But he was frank. "Herr Gruber, the footage is unclear on the man's identity. Falk is a lead, but likely a street name or an organization, not an individual we can easily trace without more. We'll investigate, of course, but these groups are notoriously difficult to pin down." It was a clear obstacle. The police, while sympathetic, had limited resources for such a case. The bobcats were another complication. They were now undoubtedly a target. They were also wild animals that had attacked a human, even if in defense of Luna. Elias couldn't keep them in his yard indefinitely. He spent an anxious day reinforcing the old shed, where he sometimes kept them confined if he had to be away, making it as secure as possible, his mind racing. He knew with a chilling certainty that Falk would be back. Days turned into a week. Luna was stable but weak, her recovery slow. Elias visited her daily, his heart aching at her listlessness. The bobcats, confined mostly to the shed and a small, hastily fenced run, were restless and agitated, missing Luna, their wild instincts chafing at the confinement. Elias did his best to care for them, but he felt overwhelmed. He needed help. He thought of Lena Fisher, a young freelance journalist who'd written a piece about local forestry issues a year ago. She'd seemed tenacious and principled. Hesitantly, he found her number and called, explaining the situation, his voice heavy with worry. Lena listened intently. The story of a devoted dog, adopted wildcats, and a shadowy trafficking ring piqued her professional interest and her sense of justice. "This Falk," she said, "I'll see what I can dig up." These traffickers often leave digital footprints, no matter how careful they try to be. Ads on obscure forums, coded messages, contacts. A minor success came a few days later. Lena called, excited. "I've found something." Chatter on a restricted online marketplace for exotic pets. References to Falk's falcons. Apparently, they specialize in rare felines and birds of prey. They're based somewhere in this region, but they're like ghosts. The information was a sliver of hope, but also a stark reminder of the danger. These were organized criminals. Tension mounted with every passing day. Every creak of the cottage at night, every unfamiliar sound from the forest sent Elias's heart racing. He barely slept, jumping at shadows, the image of the attacker and Luna's bleeding form haunting his waking hours. He knew this was far from over. Falk had been thwarted once, but they wouldn't give up easily on animals worth thousands of euros on the black market. The consequences of failure were terrifyingly clear, not just for the bobcats, but potentially for Luna and himself. Luna's recovery was a slow, arduous process. Each day, Elias drove to Dr. Klein's clinic, his old truck rattling along the familiar roads, his heart a heavy mix of hope and fear. Luna would greet him with a weak thump of her tail, her intelligent brown eyes following his every move. The deep gash on her shoulder was healing, but the light in her eyes seemed dimmer, her usual vibrant energy sapped. Dr. Klein was cautiously optimistic, but warned that nerve damage might be a lasting issue. The bobcats, meanwhile, grew increasingly restless in their confinement. Elias let them out into the fenced run for longer periods, always watching, always vigilant. They paced, their wildness a palpable force, and sometimes, when they looked at him with their piercing amber eyes, he felt a chill despite knowing they had defended Luna. About 3 weeks after the attack, As a fragile sense of normalcy was attempting to reassert itself, the turning point arrived. It wasn't violent, not at first. Elias was mending a fence panel at the edge of his property when a sleek, dark sedan, incongruous against the rustic backdrop of the forest, pulled up the track to his cottage. Two men emerged. One was short and wiry, with nervous, darting eyes. The other was taller, impeccably dressed in a way that seemed both expensive and vaguely sinister. He had a smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. Elias recognized the type instantly. Trouble. Herr Elias Gruber? The taller man asked, his voice smooth, almost purring. He didn't offer a hand. Elias straightened, his hand instinctively tightening on the hammer he'd been using. Yes. What do you want? A simple matter, Herr Gruber, the man continued, his gaze sweeping over the cottage, the shed, lingering on the fenced run where Blitz, Stern, and Shatton were currently sunning themselves, instantly alert at the stranger's arrival. We are representatives of a private zoological concern. It has come to our attention that you are in possession of 3 North American bobcats, property that was regrettably stolen from our facility some months ago. Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This was them. Falke. Stolen, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I know nothing about stolen animals. My dog found 3 abandoned kittens near death. She saved them. The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. A charming story. However, these are valuable animals. Herr Gruber, not pets for an old man and his dog. We are prepared to offer a rehoming fee for your trouble. Say 500 euros for their safe return. The shorter man shifted, his hand briefly dipping inside his jacket, a subtle but clear insinuation. Elias looked at them, at their polished shoes and predatory smiles. He thought of Luna fighting for her life. He thought of the grainy trail cam footage, the glint of the knife. The fear was there, a cold serpent coiling in his gut, but something else was stronger, a deep, unyielding rage. 500 euros, Elias repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Is that what you think their lives are worth? Or my dog's? The taller man's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I assure you, any harm to your dog was unintentional. An unfortunate accident during an attempt to retrieve our property by an overzealous employee. He has been dealt with. Dealt with. Elias scoffed. He tried to murder my dog, and you sent him. We merely wish to recover what is ours. Herr Gruber, the man said, his voice losing some of its smoothness, an edge of impatience creeping in. Perhaps 1,000 euros? And we forget this unfortunate incident ever happened. This was the moment. Elias could take the money, hand over the bobcats, and try to go back to his quiet life. The thought was a fleeting temptation, quickly extinguished by the image of Luna's trusting eyes. He couldn't. He wouldn't. These animals were abandoned, Elias said, his voice gaining strength. Left to die. Luna saved them. They are under my protection, and I know who you are. Falke. The name hung in the air between them. The taller man's eyes narrowed. The smile vanished completely. "You are making a mistake, old man." "The only mistake," Elias retorted, taking a step forward, the hammer now held firmly at his side, "was you thinking I would let you harm them again, or any other animal? Now get off my property." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension was a palpable thing, thick and suffocating. Then the taller man gave a curt nod to his associate. "It seems Herr Gruber is not as reasonable as we'd hoped. A pity." He turned back to Elias, his voice a silken threat. "You will regret this. We always get what we want." They got back into their car and drove away, leaving Elias trembling, not from fear alone, but from the adrenaline of defiance. He had crossed a line. He had openly challenged them. There was no going back to his old life. The initial goal of simply protecting Luna and the Bobcats had morphed into something far bigger, far more dangerous. He knew, with absolute certainty, that Falk would not let this rest. He had to stop them, not just for his animals, but for all the others they undoubtedly exploited. He picked up his phone and called Lena Fisher. "They were here," he said, his voice grim. "It's time we went hunting for Falk." The confrontation with the men from Falk left Elias shaken but resolute. The veiled threats, the cold arrogance in their eyes, it was a stark confirmation of what he and Lena Fisher were up against. He met Lena at a small, discreet guest house in the nearest town, the journalist's face serious as he recounted the visit. "They're brazen," Lena said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "To approach you directly like that, after the attack, they're either desperate or incredibly confident they're untouchable. Or both," Elias added grimly. "The taller one, he was the leader, I'm sure of it. He mentioned the previous attacker had been dealt with. Sounds like they don't tolerate failure." They both knew their previous approach of simply waiting for the local police to act wouldn't be enough. Officer Richter was doing what he could, but the system was slow, and Falk was adept at operating in the shadows. The immediate fallout of the confrontation was a heightened sense of urgency. Falk knew Elias wouldn't back down. Retaliation was a certainty. "We need to find their base of operations," Lena stated, her journalistic instincts kicking in. "That's where the real evidence will be. Shipping manifests, animal inventories, perhaps even other animals they're holding." Their new, more proactive plan began to take shape. Lena would use her research skills, cross-referencing the online marketplace chatter with business registries, land ownership records, anything that might connect the name Falk or known associates to a physical location. Elias, with his intimate knowledge of the local forests and abandoned properties, would scout potential areas, old farms, disused industrial sites, anything secluded enough to conduct an illegal operation. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety and cautious investigation. Elias moved the Bobcats into the deepest part of his property, reinforcing an old, stone-walled root cellar, making it as secure and comfortable as possible. It was far from ideal, and the Bobcats chafed at the increased confinement, but it was safer than the shed. Luna now slowly regaining her strength at home, seemed to sense the renewed tension, rarely leaving Elias's side, her gaze constantly scanning the tree line. Her limp was less pronounced, but Dr. Klein had confirmed some permanent muscle damage. She'd never be quite the same. The thought fueled Elias's determination. Lena, meanwhile, hit dead end after dead end. Falk was a phantom. The people involved used aliases, shell companies, and encrypted communication. Elias, on his scouting trips, found several abandoned places that seemed plausible, but none bore any definitive signs of Falk's presence. Self-doubt began to creep in. Was he too old for this? Was he putting himself, Lena, and his animals in even greater peril by actively pursuing these criminals? He was a blacksmith, a woodsman, not a detective. One evening, disheartened after another fruitless day, he was looking through the tin box where he kept odds and ends, the fragment of Blitz's tag catching his eye. Elka, he also remembered the knife. Falke. Then he recalled something the taller man had said during the confrontation. An overzealous employee. He has been dealt with. What if that employee, the original attacker, had local ties? Someone who knew the area, who might have been careless. He shared this thought with Lena. It was a long shot, but they were running out of options. Lena started looking into recent minor police reports from the wider region: trespassing, petty theft, bar fights, anything that might involve individuals with a history of animal-related offenses or known connections to the underworld. It was tedious, painstaking work. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Officer Richter, the local policeman, called Elias. Herr Gruber, I know we haven't had much progress, but something came up. A few weeks back, around the time your dog was attacked, there was a report of a man seeking treatment for severe animal bites at a small clinic 2 towns over. He claimed he was attacked by a feral dog while hiking. Matched the vague description from your trail cam. Name of Victor Haas. Has a record, mostly minor stuff, but some whispers about him being muscle for hire. Lena immediately cross-referenced Victor Haas. She found a tenuous link. Haas had once been arrested for drunk driving in a vehicle registered to a defunct company that had, for a short period, listed a P.O. box address. That P.O. box had also been used by another short-lived company with suspected ties to exotic pet sales. It was a flimsy thread, but it was something. The P.O. box was in a small industrial park on the outskirts of a larger town, about an hour's drive from Elias's cottage. It's worth checking out, Lena said, a new spark in her eyes. Industrial parks often have disused warehouses, places where people wouldn't look twice if trucks were coming and going at odd hours. Their new strategy was riskier. They weren't just reacting anymore, they were actively seeking out Falk's lair. The personal stakes felt higher than ever. Elias knew that if they were caught, Falk wouldn't hesitate to silence them permanently. Yet, the thought of the animals, of Luna's suffering, pushed him forward. The industrial park was a sprawling, anonymous collection of low-slung buildings and warehouses, many showing signs of neglect. Following Lena's hunch, they focused on the older, more isolated sections. For 2 days, they conducted covert surveillance from Lena's car, parked at a discreet distance, armed with binoculars and a telephoto lens. They watched trucks come and go, mostly legitimate businesses, but nothing screamed illegal wildlife trafficking. Discouragement began to set in. On the third evening, just as they were about to call it a day, Lena spotted it. A battered, windowless van, a model known for its use in discreet transport, turned into a narrow, overgrown service road leading to a dilapidated warehouse at the far end of the park. The warehouse had no signage. Its windows were boarded up, and a new-looking, heavy-duty security gate blocked the entrance. "That's it," Lena whispered, her voice tight with excitement. "I have a feeling." Over the next few days, they meticulously observed the warehouse. Activity was sporadic, mostly occurring late at night or in the pre-dawn hours. They saw the same windowless van several times, and occasionally the sleek, dark sedan Elias recognized from the visit by Falk's leader. They even caught a glimpse of the wiry, nervous man who had accompanied him. The pieces were falling into place, but they needed proof of what was inside. The plan they formulated was fraught with danger. They needed to get close enough to see or hear something definitive, something that would compel a larger police force to act. Lena had a high-sensitivity directional microphone and a night vision monocular. Elias, with his experience navigating forests in the dark, was better suited for a close approach. "I'll go," he said firmly, overriding Lena's protests. "I'm less likely to arouse suspicion if I'm seen at a distance than a younger woman with equipment. I can pretend to be a lost old man looking for a shortcut." The dark night of the soul arrived for Elias as he prepared for his solo reconnaissance. Luna, sensing his agitation, whined softly, nudging her head against his hand. He looked at her, at the faint scar now visible on her shoulder as her fur grew back, and his resolve hardened. He was doing this for her, for the Bobcats, for all the creatures Falk exploited. But the fear was a living thing inside him, cold and heavy. Under the cloak of a moonless night, Elias approached the warehouse perimeter. The air was still, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the city and the chirping of crickets. He moved slowly, sticking to the shadows, his old hunting skills serving him well. As he neared a section of the fence that looked less maintained, he heard it, a faint, mournful cry. Definitely not a dog or a common farm animal. Then another, a chittering sound, followed by the distinct squawk of a large bird. His heart pounded. This was it. He found a spot where the fence was loose, pulled it back just enough to slip through, and found himself in a debris-strewn yard behind the warehouse. He could hear muffled sounds from within, more animal noises, the low murmur of voices. He crept towards a grimy, boarded-up window, hoping to find a crack or a hole. Suddenly, a door creaked open, not 20 feet away. A man stepped out, silhouetted against the dim light from within. Victor Haas, the attacker, his arm still bandaged. He stretched, then lit a cigarette, his gaze sweeping the yard. Elias froze, pressing himself flat against the cold brick wall, hidden by a stack of discarded pallets. His breath hitched. If Haas saw him, It was over. Haas took a long drag from his cigarette, coughed, then casually scanned the darkness again. Elias could feel the man's gaze pass right over his hiding spot. An eternity seemed to pass. Then Haas grunted, flicked the cigarette away, and went back inside, letting the door slam shut. Elias waited, his limbs trembling, until his breathing returned to normal. He knew he couldn't risk going further, but he had what he needed: confirmation of live, exotic animals and the presence of a known Falk operative. He slipped back through the fence and made his way to Lena, who was waiting anxiously in the car. "They're there, Lena," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I heard them. Birds. Something else. And Haas is inside." Armed with Elias's eyewitness account, the previous police report on Haas, and Lena's meticulously gathered circumstantial evidence linking Falk to the warehouse, they decided to bypass the local police and go directly to the state's Environmental Crime Unit. They laid out their story, presenting every piece of information they had. This time, the response was different. The specialized unit understood the patterns of wildlife traffickers. They saw the credibility in Elias's testimony and Lena's research. An officer looked at them gravely. "Your information is very compelling, Herr Gruber, Fräulein Fischer. We'll set up our own surveillance immediately. If what you suspect is true, we'll move quickly." The final test had been passed. They had risked everything, pushed themselves to their limits. Now it was in the hands of the authorities. As they drove away from the police headquarters, Elias felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a fragile sliver of hope. The raid happened 2 days later, just before dawn. The Environmental Crime Unit, working with a heavily armed tactical team, descended on the isolated warehouse. Elias and Lena had been asked to be nearby, at a temporary police command post set up a safe distance away, in case on-the-spot information or identification was needed. The air was cold and electric with anticipation. Elias found himself gripping Lena's arm, his knuckles white. Through the static-laced police radio, they heard the operation unfold. "Alpha Team, breach. Bravo Team, cover perimeter," shouted commands. The sound of a gate crashing, then a confusing cacophony of noise. Elias imagined the scene: the surprise, the chaos, the fear of the animals trapped inside. Suspects attempting to flee, south exit. A voice crackled. Multiple individuals barricaded in main office. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Lena was scribbling furiously in her notebook, her journalistic instincts overriding her fear. Elias just prayed for the safety of the officers, for the animals. Then, a different kind of sound, the distressed calls of many different animals, now louder, less muffled, as doors were forced open. "We have multiple hostiles in custody," the radio announced. The primary target, known as Gregor Holm, apprehended. Holm was the well-dressed leader who had visited Elias. Victor Haas, also secured. Site is clear of human threats. Animal control and veterinary teams move in. A wave of relief so profound it left Elias momentarily dizzy, washed over him. It was over. They had them. When they were finally allowed to approach the warehouse under police escort, the scene was one of organized chaos and heartbreaking reality. Dozens of crates and cages were being brought out into the gray morning light. Inside were creatures Elias had only ever seen in books or zoos. Parrots with dull, plucked feathers, small monkeys huddled together in terror, bewildered-looking owls, and, heartbreakingly, several more young bobcats crammed into tiny, filthy enclosures. The stench of fear and neglect was overpowering. Veterinarians were already on site, triaging the animals, their faces grim. Elias saw the Falk members, Holm, Haas, the wiry man, and several others, being led away in handcuffs, their faces sullen and defiant. Holm caught Elias's eye and spat on the ground, but his arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. Elias felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for the suffering these creatures had endured. This dark chapter, which had begun with one injured dog and 3 tiny bobcat kittens, had finally reached its brutal, necessary conclusion. The weeks following the raid were a whirlwind of activity and media attention. Operation Falk's Nest, as the press dubbed it, exposed a significant illegal wildlife trafficking ring with tendrils reaching across borders. Gregor Holm and his key operatives, including Victor Haas, faced a barrage of charges. Lena Fisher's articles, filled with harrowing details from the raid and Elias's courageous story, brought national attention to the pervasive cruelty of the illegal pet trade. The rescued animals, over 50 in total, were transported to specialized sanctuaries and wildlife rehabilitation centers across Germany. Many were in poor health, suffering from malnutrition, disease, and psychological trauma. Their road to recovery would be long, and for some, a return to the wild would never be possible. Elias, despite his desire for privacy, became a reluctant local hero. The villagers, once wary, now greeted him with newfound respect. Luna, her scar a permanent reminder of her bravery, was showered with affection and treats whenever she accompanied Elias to the village. Her limp remained a slight, uneven gait, but her spirit was undimmed. And what of Blitz, Stern, and Shatten? After a period of assessment at a wildlife facility, it was determined that, having been raised in such close proximity to humans and a domestic dog, and yet having their wild instincts fiercely intact, a direct release into the wild would be too risky for them and for local ecosystems. A renowned wildlife sanctuary in the Bavarian Forest National Park, known for its large naturalistic enclosures, offered them a permanent home. They would live together in safety, with space to roam and behave as bobcats should. Elias and Luna were granted special permission to visit. Their first visit was emotional. The 3 bobcats, now sleek and powerful in their prime, approached the enclosure fence where Elias and Luna stood. For a moment, they regarded Luna, their foster mother, with an intense, unreadable gaze. Then, Blitz let out a soft chuff, a sound Elias hadn't heard since they were much younger. and rubbed his head against the wire mesh closest to where Luna stood, her tail wagging slowly. Stern and Shatton watched, their wildness evident, but without the fear or aggression they might show to other humans. It wasn't domestication, but it was a clear, undeniable bond. Elias continued his quiet life, but it was forever changed. The emptiness left by Martha was still there, but now it was also filled with the warmth of new friendships, with Lena, with Dr. Klein, and with a community that had rallied around him. He knew the fight against cruelty wasn't over, but he had proven that one old man, one brave dog, and 3 wild spirits could make a difference. Luna, the rescued dog who became a rescuer, remained by his side, a testament to the extraordinary, unbelievable love that can bridge any divide, even that between species.